So hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and in today's video I wanted to talk about the classics that I have always loved rereading. So I really enjoy reading classics and I kind of was thinking, I was like, there's certain books that I always go back to and always reread, no matter kind of what the occasion or, you know, there's a certain number of books that I will always reread. And I wouldn't always reread, like if I didn't really relate to a classic, I wouldn't reread it at all. But these are the 5 that I go back to all the time, I absolutely love, and that I think you will too. So before I get on with the video guys, please do click that subscribe button if you'd like to watch more videos from me. I post 2 videos a week, so there'll be lots to look forward to in the coming weeks. And if you're already subscribed, why not hit that notification bell and put it on always so you never miss a video. So that's enough of the kind of like pre-ramble from me. Let's get going with the classics that I always reread. So the first book will come as no surprise to anyone, but it is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, aka my favourite classic ever. So I have reread this book, I don't even know how many times, like so many times. And I find something new in it every single time I read it. There's really a comfort in this book for me, as there is with the TV show and the film. I just go back to all of those different mediums all the time. What I love about the novel is that it's got a wry touch of humour, and you wouldn't expect that really from a classic, but Jane Austen is so kind of witty, and especially in Pride and Prejudice, so playful, and also casts a very kind of wry look at society at the time in Regency England. So I absolutely adore Pride and Prejudice. It is my favourite novel of all time. And I feel like I do need to reread this soon. I can't remember when I last reread this book, probably like a year ago maybe, but it might be time for another reread because it's the best. And also, as I said, is such a great source of comfort for me. I think I first read this book when I was like 13 or 14. I'm still in love with it today when I'm 28, and it's just incredible. So, Pride and Prejudice, the best reread ever. The second classic I always reread is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So I read this, I try to read this every year. It probably ends up happening every 2 years, but basically this has become a kind of like a Christmas read for me, mainly because it is so dark and atmospheric, and you know, it's set on the Yorkshire moors. It's so kind of moody and it really brings about an atmosphere. So I like to read this. It's quite a depressing Christmassy read, but I like to read this at Christmas, and it just fills me with such kind of like coziness, I guess, even though the themes of Wuthering Heights aren't that cozy. It's quite a dark novel. If you've not read it yet, it's quite hard to read at times. I find it harder to read than Pride and Prejudice, for example, because it is so filled with, you know, doom, I guess, and not much hope. But I always love getting to the end of this book and kind of seeing Heathcliff's journey, Cathy's journey, and I just love this book. So I often reread this. I try to read it every year, but it really doesn't happen like that. So I think this is also due for a reread at Christmas time this year. Maybe I'll film a reading vlog of me reading it, who knows? So it wouldn't be a video from me if it wasn't a Jane Austen hype train, because the next book is another Jane Austen book that I love rereading. It is short but sweet, and it is the last novel that Jane Austen ever published. It was published posthumously after her death. It is Persuasion by Jane Austen, and aside from Pride and Prejudice, which is just comfort in a book for me and is, you know, has all those amazing memories for me, Persuasion is my second favourite Jane Austen novel. This is basically Jane Austen in her prime. She, you know, had written so many novels at this point. You can really notice a difference from this book and like Sense and Sensibility, for example. The heroine is older, you know, she has to learn to overcome her family's opinions, and, you know, she is basically ripped apart from the person she loves because she listened to her family who said that he wasn't good enough for her. So I really like Persuasion because the themes are a lot kind of more grown up and thought through and bittersweet. And I just love Anne Elliot, who is the main character of this novel, and I think if you have not yet read Persuasion, you're missing out on a brilliant, brilliant novel. I also really love the film adaptation with, I think it's Rupert Penry Jones, and that film adaptation is beautiful. So I do need to reread this and watch that film. I think that would be like a great time, basically. I don't reread this as often as Pride and Prejudice, but I would really love to reread this very soon, because I think the last time I read this was probably about like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I have read it like 3 or 4 times now. I love Persuasion. It's one of those like underrated Austen novels. Everyone talks about Sense and Sensibility, which is very kind of like down there for me. I don't really enjoy Sense and Sensibility. I don't know why. Maybe I'll get there later in life. Maybe I'll learn to appreciate it a bit more. But for me, Persuasion will always be the one. And the 4th book that I wanted to talk about, that I have reread for God knows how many years. I always come back to it. It's not a book per se, but it is the poetry of John Keats. This is the Bright Star collection. Basically, there was a film made about John Keats called Bright Star. Bright Star is also one of his poems. So this collection is called Bright Star. It is the complete poems and selected letters of John Keats. So the reason why I have this is basically, I have like so many kind of Keats books back there. But the reason I have all these is because I did my final year dissertation on John Keats. He is my favourite poet, and I always find myself coming back to his poems when, I don't know, for several reasons, like when I'm in need of comfort, or, you know, just the mood strikes me. There are so many brilliant poems of his that I just love, and I just think that he is amazing. So obviously I did my 10,000 word dissertation on him. So during that I came back to his poems a lot, but I've also read them in the years, you know, after that, and I still kind of go back to them now. I do think I need to revisit some of his longer poems, like Endymion and Lamia, some of his best poems, especially Lamia. I think Lamia is one of his like most famous. Endymion was like a poem that he wrote earlier on in his career, and it was kind of negatively influenced by a lot of kind of poets who he was friends with at the time, who kind of gave him bad habits when it came to poetry, which I find really interesting. But my favourite poems from John Keats and from this collection are Ode to a Nightingale, Ode on a Grecian Urn, The Eve of St. Agnes, and Bright Star, who the collection is named after. That is a poem that he dedicated to Fanny Brawne, who was his kind of lover, and even though they never actually got married, he sadly passed away before they could get married. It's just one of the most like beautiful love poems ever. So I'm a huge John Keats fan, as you can tell, and I always find myself coming back to him and back to this volume. My final book that I reread like all the time, one of my favourite TV shows ever. You can tell I'm getting excited because I just love talking about this book, is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. Elizabeth Gaskell is an author who I kind of came to a bit later in life, in that I always loved, I think it's the BBC TV series of North and South. I watched that first, fell in love with it, but then didn't actually pick up the novel until a lot later. I remember studying Elizabeth Gaskell during my English literature degree, but I can't remember what book I actually read during my degree. I just remember not liking it. So I kind of was a bit like put off, and I just didn't want to read this book. However, I then picked it up years after I graduated uni and just fell in love with it, and now this is one of my favourite classics of all time. It's a very, very special novel to me because I think I just like discovered the TV show and just fell in love with that, and then fell in love with the novel, and it all kind of just came together for me, and I just really, really adored the characters. So this is a lot more grittier than a novel like Pride and Prejudice. This is set in the industrial north, in Victorian England, so not Regency. It's a bit later here, but it's set during the Industrial Revolution, and it's set in quite a brutal industrial town in the north of England, where our main character Margaret, who is southern, she comes from the south, and she's had a very kind of like sheltered, lovely life down the south. When she moves to the north with her family, she gets a brutal kind of awakening of what life is actually like up there, and she meets the local mill owner, John Thornton, and just doesn't agree with his methods of treating his staff. She doesn't agree with him in general. He's very hard, he's very moody, he's very kind of strict, and that kind of sets off their entire journeys and character arcs. John Thornton has my heart, it must be said. I love this book, and I find myself coming back to the TV show all the time. It is such a good TV show. So I think it's still on Netflix, so if you're interested, do go check it out because, oh my god, so good. So guys, that is it from my 5 classics that I always reread. I hope you enjoyed this video, and do let me know if there's any classics that you reread all the time. Let me know down in the comments and give me some recommendations. Tell me what I should be reading next. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time for another video.